go. Yeah.
How's it going?
It's good, man. Got me up early on a on Saturday morning.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate you getting up, man. We're gonna have some coffee. We're gonna chat a little bit.
Oh, I go for the way more unhealthy option, man. There
Oh,
we go.
going full throttle today, huh?
Yeah.
Good, man. I love your shirt.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I saw somebody else with a similar design and I was like, I really like what they did there. How do I put my messaging behind that? So
All right. Well, Nathan Todd, man, coming to us from Charleston, South Carolina. Welcome to Own Your Space. We're
yeah,
just gonna
man.
we're just gonna dive right in, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah. So Nathan from Charleston, South Carolina. I go by the label of the loneliness coach. And I'm a dude who was born 8 weeks premature, 4 pounds, 10 ounces, diagnosed with cerebral palsy at the age of 2. Didn't learn to walk until I was 4. And that is a huge part of what's shaped me to be the man I am today, and what has kind of led me down this unique path of being on a mission to eradicate loneliness one conversation at a time.
I love that, man. On a mission. Yeah. And you post a lot of stuff about, peel back the label, no label defines me. I mean, I love that. We're all human beings.
Yeah.
People, it doesn't matter, where we're from, what we've been through. It doesn't really matter. Just everybody wants human connection. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be heard. We just want to be people.
Yeah. Um it's so funny. We often talk about wanting to be successful and wanting to be all these things, and yet when we think about the most successful people that we all recognize, the one thing that aren't doing is being the same. And when I talk about peeling back the labels, a lot of it, I believe, is we get stuck in this idea of who we're supposed to be. And that narrative is often shaped by society way before you and I and anybody listening ever got here. And yet it drives us to all want to be the same and not be different, search for acceptance. But when we think about the most successful people, um, they're being themselves. I often say there's not much difference in the people that we often look up to from us. What they figured out is they figured out what they're really, really good at, and they figured out how to go all in on that one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't, I totally agree, man. Um, you know, I've moved around a lot. My dad was in the Air Force. So we would live somewhere for 3 years and move, or 4 years and move. And, you talk about how society puts labels on you, and people live because of what's expected of them, or people have been labeled. And it's like every time we moved, I was, new, or, in your terms, lonely. It was like, it was just my brother and I. So it was like he was my best friend. or is, we were just had each other. And showing up, and it's like people judge you and have expectations of, you know if you're wearing something, then they automatically make assumptions, or if you look a certain way. And and it's different, for people that have never experienced that, to be judged, that just kind of, they just grow up and they are who they are, and they're around their friends, and they become the image of who their friends see them as, not who they are inside. And sometimes it's sad. And people should just let out that inner beast, let out that human being, who they are. And it takes time, and it takes, you said you're a coach. So do you have specific clients, or are you just kind of coaching the world, man?
um, yeah, I would say the people that I often end up working with are people who haven't peeled back that expected label yet, and people who they've got a deep wanting to actually be able to use their voice, and they haven't ever felt like they've been able to do that. A lot of times I work with more women than men, and I also work with a lot of people who identify as having disabilities as well. Uh, but really, man, if you come to me and you're like, I'm feeling disconnected, I'm feeling lonely. And here's the thing, there's so many people who are experiencing that, and yet there's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt around having that human emotion. So it takes a lot of courage to actually come to somebody other than yourself and say, yeah, I think I am experiencing this feeling, and I don't know what to do. I don't know um, what a plan of action is, because it's also not just about, well, if I'm if I'm lonely, I'm gonna go talk to Jason, and by me talking to Jason, that one person, that it's all gonna go away. It doesn't happen exactly like that. And I think that loneliness, as much as it's impacting the world now, gets a bad rap, actually, because it's actually a human survival signal, and it's telling you, hey, it's time to get connected with your tribe. Um, and it's just like being hungry and being thirsty. The problem is we've become really, really good at ignoring that signal when it comes up. And I think, this is the first time I've ever thought about it in this way. I think that one of the things where social media kind of hurts us in this arena is those moments when we first get hit with the feeling. I think we take the ease of which we think we can connect with people for granted. We're like, oh, yeah, I am feeling this way, but I'll take care of it. I'll reach out to so and so in a day or whatever. And it's so easily accessible to go look at this list of all these friends and these followers, and have a false sense of, well, I'm connected to all these people. But are you really, in a way that matters to you? That would be my question to the audience.
Yeah, I love that, man. You said it's like a sense of survival, human survival, just like food and water, because it is. Um, Being connected is having a need for some form of love. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody needs a tribe. That human connection. It is part of survival because it allows you to exchange your energy with someone. And when energy is connected, it becomes stronger, and it fuels us, and it allows us to go beyond ourself. People just we want to be heard. And I've felt that way most of my life. I just want to be heard. And it's not that I have uh something special inside of me, because everybody has that. It's just like you said, it's about courage, and having the courage to take what's in our heads and verbalize that, to have real meaningful connections, real meaningful conversations. And you're right, social media can give you a false sense of that. What gave you the courage, Nathan, to start doing what you're doing? Because you're very inspiring, man. I just love that.
I appreciate that. I think it started before I ever could actually recognize what was happening. Like, I think this has been a journey throughout my life. And so, from a very, very early age, my mom would take me anywhere that she was advocating for me. She would take me, and I would be a part of the process, even if it meant just sitting there and being part of the meeting. Um, because I guess she realized that, hey, this is about him. He needs to be here to start to understand that this is about him. Um, and so I would go to all my IEP meetings, regardless of how young I was. I went to them elementary all the way through my educational career. But when it comes to loneliness, there's a very specific starting point that I have come to recognize. And so back in 2008 was when I graduated from college. And, in the US, we were going through just like everything was falling through. Nobody was getting jobs. The economy was crap. And I just remember um, getting on phone interviews, crushing phone interviews, getting to the next step. And that moment of walking into an in-person interview, sitting down for maybe 2 minutes, looking across the table and realizing, oh, I may be the first person that this person has interacted with that has a disability, and they don't know what to do with me. They see this very obvious difference, and in their mind, because I've now been a manager before, they're thinking, how much money is this going to cost? what kind of accommodations is this person going to need, and what am I going to do with them? Like, that's the conversation that's happening. And so when that's the conversation that's internally happening, that is projected outward. And there's just an energy where it's like, oh, this isn't, I don't think it matters what I'm going to say here. This isn't going to go well. And so for over a year, this was the process. I went on so many interviews, and it was like all the stuff that my parents had taught me to believe in. It was like, it's like, oh, this is the real, this is the real stuff. This is the real experience. And so I spent over a year just sitting on the couch. Probably if I would have went in to therapy, I would have been diagnosed really with depression at that point. So it was one of the most lonely times in my life, because here's what I think a lot of people don't understand too. So I've got cerebral palsy. It's a First off, most people don't even realize it's a brain injury. Like, that's truly what it is. So I'm a person with a brain injury, and I think what people don't realize is oftentimes you're going to be the only person in your immediate group that has this experience. And as much as your friends, your family, they try and understand, there are going to be things that they're not going to understand. And there are going to be things that I don't know how to communicate, because it's like it's just a feeling. And unless you have this, you're not going to get it. Um, and so it's really hard to always be able to support somebody who's going through something where you don't actually have experience. You can try as much as you can, but you're not going to understand. And there's lots of people where that's going on, and their thing is, well, why don't you just get a job? uh you should be happy for any job. And um that's that's not nobody. Like, what makes us different than you? Is that what you wanted to be told when you were trying to get a job? But I spent the year on the couch, and I run people that I work with through an exercise where we kind of get out of your head when it comes to loneliness. And let's see, I think I might actually have it, so at least you can see, Jason, you can see the picture. It might be hard to see because of the light here, but I run people through this set of questions, and we actually create a visual image of what your loneliness looks like. And so for me, what it looked like is me kind of fading into that couch. That's when I know that I'm experiencing loneliness. When I start to get that feeling again, I'm like, oh, I better go do some of my own practices.
Wow. Nathan, I'm going to tell you that I didn't know that our conversation was going to go here, but I'm so glad that it did. Um, I work, I do a podcast. I'm a leader in my organization. I work for a large company that's worldwide. My day job, right? Um, and I'm on a committee that in fact, we started a program to hire those with disabilities, and we thought, well, you talk about labels, and so we didn't want to call it disabilities. We just felt like, you know what, that's not right, because when you talk about, it's people that are differently abled, not disabled, because and when it comes down to it, we're all differently abled. Even when you talk about quote unquote normal, like he's normal, he's not normal. Well, what the hell is normal? And so everyone is differently abled. We all have different skill sets. We all think differently. It doesn't matter if I have a label that uh, talks about a medical condition, or a birth condition, or anything that's happened to me. We're all differently abled. And so we started this campaign before 2020, and I was on the diversity inclusion team for our country, for our company with nationwide. And so I would meet with different leaders around our organization, and figuring out how we can partner with uh, other organizations to bring people into our company that just want to be human. They just want to work. They just want to be productive and be part of something. And what we found, Nathan, was that I can hire somebody that is quote unquote normal, and that person may or may not give it their all when they're at work. They may take an extended, smoke break multiple times a day with very little productivity. They may call in because they don't feel like coming to work today. And what we found was, with those that are differently abled, uh, generally want to be there, that they wanted to show up, they wanted to be productive, they wanted to be part of something. And so it was like we got more energy from somebody that maybe didn't have a chance somewhere else. Like, you're talking about going in for an interview and sitting across the table from somebody and thinking, okay, I can tell this is the first time this person's had this experience with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to get this job. Well, the people that I work with see you and say, we want this person on our team, because this person has got the courage to be here and wants to be here. Now, you said, how much is this going to cost me, and how much accommodations do I have to make? Um, you know, we as employers, we make accommodations for all people. you know it doesn't, like, if I have somebody who's a mom, and she needs to go attend to a sick child, or something comes up, she has a doctor's appointment, we accommodate them, and allow them to go to their doctor's appointment, come back to the office. We you know there's a cost, but we have that person because they are a contributor, and they bring a piece of them to the organization, the team, and everybody has a different dynamic. And something we also found was those that are differently abled, when they would show up to work, their love and energy that came from them really shifted the dynamic of everybody else in the room in a positive way. And it's amazing and beautiful. And I'm so glad that you have the courage. And Nathan, I think that, I was in a group chat. Ryan Hartley has his we are all always better than yesterday. And I saw you, and I heard you. And then I, you know, seeked you out on Instagram, and we connected, and I'm looking at your posts, and I'm like, man, I got to have a conversation with Nathan and get him on my show because you're genuine. And, my show's called Own Your Space. And I don't know. I mean, that describes you, right? Own your space, be comfortable with who you are, and just be human.
Yeah, I hope that that often describes me more often than not. And I actually I love where this conversation has ended up too. And I actually want to um offer up a little bit of a different perspective here because I think that it's important and it is about labels. So I just want to ask you um some questions and get your response because I think it's going to be interesting and is going to help in what you're doing with your company. So when you hear the word disability, do you relate that to being good or being bad?
I I don't ever think, me personally, I don't have a positive or negative image when I hear disability.
Okay. And I say that for the reason of one of the things that I often say is say the word.
Yeah,
Like so yeah, disability.
disability. Yeah, it's a dis is the opposite of, or the negative of, ability.
But I think that
The absence.
often people use it and they see it as a bad term. So that's why we shy away from using the word and we find other ways to identify the word. But here's why I think it's important to use the word. And it's so fitting that we're having this conversation today because it's the last day of the month and this month is considered Disability Pride Month. So having pride in being a disabled individual. But when we teach, and I'm going to say specifically kids, when we teach kids that it's not okay to use the word disability as something that helps be a part of their identity, what happens is they walk around and they say, well, I'm not disabled. Okay. That becomes their story, which that's okay. But by accepting that as your story, you also have such a greater opportunity to miss out on things that are available to you because you aren't comfortable saying, I'm a person who has a disability. When people teach people to not use that as part of their identity, it's because I mean ultimately what that person I would think most times is trying to do is keep their family member safe, keep themselves sometimes from feeling discomfort because there's often a discomfort that comes from saying the word. Um, but I think that by not using it, we're doing a disservice to kids as they grow up and try and navigate the world. And one of the hardest things is it's really hard to see disabled leaders in the world that they can say, hey, there's somebody like me that's doing something that I want to do. Um, I have a shirt that says, it's not about being the Walmart greeter or the motivational speaker. And I think that a lot of times that's the lane in which kids with disabilities, there are only two options. They're really, really medial jobs, like, and there's nothing wrong with these jobs. It's just the reality of I'm gonna go be a Walmart greeter, or I'm gonna go work at a grocery store, or something like that. Or I've been told so many times I'm an inspiration that I'm gonna go be a speaker, and yet most people have no clue how much fucking hard work that is. You don't just show up and get asked to speak and make lots of money, like, regardless of what your story is. And I think oftentimes they miss out on, there's so much in between, and it's not their fault. It's the view that they have from what society has told them is possible.
Wow. Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, I would love to continue this conversation beyond our time this morning with you, because I think that, I've got my step cousin's son has Downs, and he told me one day, he said yeah, he thinks and feels like you and I. He just can't communicate like you and I.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful because when people have difficulty communicating, then the other person has difficulty understanding. And getting the world to understand is knowledge, which breaks down barriers. Um, I'm gonna go back to, you said, how does the word disability make me feel? Was it good or not good, or positive or negative, or at least that's what I had in my head. And I'll tell you, uh, I, I if I I'm gonna lean towards the positive side, because when I'm around people with disabilities, I feel their energy versus trying to understand what they're saying. And I know everybody's different, and I don't know if it's the empathy or just who I am, intuitiveness, but when I it's like that energy is love. I've always believed that is the power of our existence. That's, you showed me that image of you, your notes on the couch and shrinking, and I would love to be able to look at that a little deeper. I mean, if you wanted to, have you posted? You've posted that, right? I think I've seen that
Yeah.
before. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna find that and read it a little bit closer, because I would love to have a copy of that and see it. And
Well, so here's the thing. Let's stop right here, and let's close your eyes for a second.
okay,
Right? Take in, I know we're on audio, so take in some breaths for yourself. And as you think about this, I want you to think about your experience with loneliness. Right? And as you dive into this feeling for yourself, and don't say anything, I don't think, unless you feel called to. But first, I want you to think about, when you experience loneliness, what are the things that you hear? So they could be words, they could be sounds, like from the environment. Uh, they could be things that you're saying, things that you're hearing other people say. So, what is it that you hear? Now that you know what this is, When you experience loneliness, what is it that you see? Do you see other people around you? Do you see no one around you? Are you in a specific place? And remember that whatever comes up is what's supposed to come up. There is no right way, there is no wrong way to do this. This is your way, is the right way. Now, I want you to think about when you experience loneliness. I want you to think about you're getting this box of crayons off the shelf. You open it up and you get ready to pull a crayon. When you pull this crayon, the label of the crayon says lonely. What color do you see? Now we know what you hear, we know what you see, we know what color represents your loneliness. Now I want you to imagine this loneliness, this feeling that you feel, it's an inanimate object and you see it clearly. What is that inanimate object? When you experience this feeling of loneliness, are there other feelings that are associated with it? And then 2 more questions. As you experience loneliness, what are things that you're saying to yourself? This is your conversation that you're having with you during this experience. And then finally, now that we know what you see, we know what you hear, we know what color it is, and we know what the inanimate object is and what you're saying to yourself, I want you to come up with a name for this loneliness. It could be Lonely Larry, it could be the Lone Wolf, but I want you to come up with a name. And then when you are ready, you can open up your eyes and we can talk about what you experienced.
Wow. So I felt empty. I felt the absence of love, absence of human connection. Uh, the color was black. Everything was dark. Um, you know, I have an image of a chair that I drew many years ago, and the chair, because I've done some artwork in the past, and so I drew this chair once. I wasn't intentional; it just had this image, and I drew this chair. And so when you're talking to me, I pictured that image that I drew, and it's a chair that had these collars around the legs, and it like screwed into the floor, like the chair's not going to move.
Mm.
And the chair was in a corner and it had cobwebs all over it. And so I was picturing that chair because it was a time in my life that I felt empty and alone. And wow. And it's just silence is what I heard. It was just silent, which isn't a very good feeling.
All right, so I say let's because I know first off that took courage to actually do that with me live here for this conversation. So I also want to let's finish the whole thing because so now you have an actual representation, and so why take the drawing of this? Like, so if you had a sheet of paper, you can answer and create your own version of this based on what you answered, but why have this actual visual representation is because that's not the only thing that we do. Now, I want you to clear that. So just take in a couple deep breaths, clear that up. And now I want you to close your eyes, and we're going to do this again, but we're focusing on something completely different. Okay. So, Jason, right now, what I want you to imagine is you are experiencing a level of deep connection. You are completely connected. That's to yourself and to those around you. And I want to ask you, when you have this deep sense of connection, what do you hear? What are the conversations going on around you? What are the sounds from the environment? What is it that you hear? Now that we know what you hear, when you have this feeling of connection, what do you see? Are you with others? Are you by yourself? Are you at a specific location? What is it that you see? Now we're back to a new box of crayons. And this time we pull out a new crayon, and this crayon says connection. What color is that crayon? Now we know what you hear, we know what you see, we know what color the crayon is. Now we're thinking of connection and we're imagining an inanimate object. What is that inanimate object that represents connection? What are you feeling when you experience this level of deep connection? Are there other feelings associated with feeling connected? What are you saying to yourself? What is your inner voice saying? And finally, what name do you want to give this new found representation for your connection? What is the name? Had people say, my angel. I've had people say, my warm Christmas sweater. What is that for you? And when you're ready, you can open up your eyes.
So, Nathan, yeah, I never gave you the name of the other, and it was the empty chair. And so through the exercise that we just the second half, yellow, just a glowing bright yellow of I think warmth, light, and I envisioned many chairs in a circle facing each other, and I envisioned people in that circle, so there were no corners. Everybody could see everybody. There was a lot of smiles. There was a lot of laughing and conversation, and the energy level in that circle was amazing. And the love chair versus the empty chair.
You know, I never knew when I first started thinking of this idea as an exercise. I never knew what it was going to create, but it's interesting. I've started doing this with enough people, and I trust me, I don't know what this means. I love science, but this is way deeper science than what I'm currently capable of understanding. But a chair is a common object that comes up for people when they're talking about their experience of loneliness. So it's really, really interesting that seems to be an image that our brain goes to. So if there are any like really deep scientists that listen to this episode, I would love to have a conversation around that and what that could potentially mean. But that's shown up multiple times, and I feel like it's starting to be enough where I'm like, there's something to this.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a scientist. I do love science, by the way. I love learning about science. Yeah, I've been looking at and reading some stuff on heart math, how the energy from your heart and the neurons in your heart go far beyond those that come from your brain. And interesting stuff, man. And the chair, yeah, and it was interesting because the chair was symbolic on both sides of that exercise for me, but there were multiple chairs, and one was in a corner locked down with cobwebs on it, and the other one was in a circle with people sitting in them, having wonderful exchanges of loving conversation, energy, smiles. Um, yeah, look into that, man. The chair.
And here's the point. So now let's say you go, and now that we've had this conversation, you actually sit down and you create those two separate images for yourself based on what came up for you. Now you have visual representations that you can actually ask yourself in times where you may feel like you're starting to feel lonely. You have a visual representation that says, hey, am I the empty chair right now? And what would it take for me to move over here to the love chair?
Yeah.
And then if I'm with you, let's say I'm with you, I now know that you've done this exercise. And now you've got all your listeners, they know that you've done this exercise. So they could be like, hey, Jason, I think you may be sitting in that empty chair right now. And
Yeah.
so that's a way where we can communicate where not everybody's going to know what the heck that means, but
Yeah.
you do.
Yep. Yeah. That's awesome. Very cool stuff. So, recently you read a book to some kids just this week, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Was it the big umbrella?
The big umbrella, yeah.
Yeah, that how was that experience, man?
You know, it's so funny, man. I do have these like ideas that I want to be this huge, well-known person in the world. I want to be speaking on big stages. But you know what? Ultimately, that's one of my favorite parts of anything that I do. And it's not related to any of my loneliness work. It's a great nonprofit that I have the opportunity to be a part of. And I don't know, there's something about, and I think I'm just somebody who is naturally drawn to the energy that is created by young kids. Like I've always like enjoyed spending time with people that are younger than me. And I say that because I'd be doing that with my little cousins when I may have been a teenager and they're little kids. And um, it just, I think if I could be anything outside of what I'm doing, man, life goals would be stay at home dad, no joke. Like I'd be happy just doing that, man. So being able to do these story times, I love it because it involves making a difference for the kids. It involves creativity, and I've approached it as how do I create my own version of Mr. Rogers and Reading Rainbow. Like that's when they said, "Hey Nathan, we want you to start doing these." That's where my mind automatically went to.
It's awesome. Kids are amazing and they don't put labels on things. They just are. Whether they're uh, eating a sandwich or picking their nose or
Yeah.
hugging on their neighbor, they're squirmy, they can't sit still, or they're just so involved and drawn into your story, the book that you're reading, and their imaginations just run. There's no limits. Kids have no limits.
Yeah. And so we're getting close to where it's getting closer and closer to where I've been doing this for about a year. And, it's interesting. So I've done all this where I haven't seen a single kid actually. So I'm reading to them, but reading to myself every time that I do this. And so it's always like the question of, I wonder who's watching. I wonder how this is making a difference. I know that it is. It's making a difference for me, regardless of who tells me. But it's always interesting to get those messages that people are watching. And like my cousin for this week, they got up at 8 in the morning to watch a story time. I do it in like midday, and she's like, "Yeah, we got up to watch the story time," and it's just fun, man. And the thing there is like with the work that I do over there for the nonprofit, it's all about inclusion and working with the families of children who have disabilities because um, we work birth to 5. And, one of the hardest things, I didn't even know this existed until I started doing this work, but kids get expelled from preschool for behavior, and oftentimes kids with disabilities are a high percentage of that number. And it's exactly what we talked about earlier. It's because there's a communication gap there, and they just are having their experience, and maybe they're overwhelmed by the environment and they're having a reaction, and then they get labeled as the bad kid, and really they're just trying to understand how to navigate their environment. And if you know that, you can start to have a great impact because you can put tools in place to help soothe whatever's going on. And one of the greatest stories, I used to do a lot of work with older individuals with disabilities, and because I worked for a Center for Independent Living, and we would go into what's called a day program where kids from 18 to like I think at one point there may have been somebody that was 100. So that's like the age range of all these people. And so they get dropped off because their family members have to go to work and they need somewhere to go because they're no longer in the school system. So they go to these programs, and there was this guy who had autism. Um, and it was almost to the point of being nonverbal, but he wasn't nonverbal. He just communicated very rarely. And one of the greatest things that ever happened, he was a big dude, um, 6 foot plus,
Wow.
200 something pounds plus. And so that created a lot of fear for some people. And, you know, we got a snake, a weighted snake, and gave it to that guy and then taught him how to use it. And what did that do? There's something about weighted stuff that helps soothe when somebody's overstimulated. And all we would have to do is say, hey, go get your snake. Can you show me your snake? He would get it, he would put it on, and then he would immediately calm down. But it took, as my shirt here says, it took patience to actually be like, okay, what's actually going on here? Like, I know that you're trying to communicate with me, but you have to do it in something other than your words. So how do we figure out what that is? And that's for everybody. Going back to your conversation about your family member, like there's a way that they communicate that is uniquely theirs, and it requires patience to try and figure out what that is. Are we able to do that every time? No, because we're human. And but the more often you actually try, the more often that people recognize that you care. If you're trying, and hey, if you both get frustrated, I think that's awesome because guess what? That to me shows that you're both human. Um, and you're both frustrated about the same situation. Um, and dude, one of the greatest things, and you said it earlier, I want to reiterate, if you want to learn how to interact as a human being without judgments and preconceived notions, go hang out with a bunch of people who have intellectual disabilities. You will learn, if you are open to it, you will learn more than you ever knew possible just by watching them interact. I watched somebody fall and hurt themselves, and I watched people that you would say couldn't communicate about what was going on. They were communicating with each other and they weren't using words. And I watched it happen. So if you think that somebody doesn't understand, you are sorely mistaken, and you better watch out what you say, because people often know more than what you're giving them credit for.
I love that. I love that. That and you mentioned communicating and navigating the moment. I have a poem. It's one of my favorite poems. Uh, the past is history. The future is a mystery. This moment is a gift, and that's why we call it the present. And it doesn't matter. I mean, yes, it matters. So but it doesn't matter where we've been or where we're going. Everything matters about right now and what we're doing and engaging and communicating, whether it's verbal or nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
There's, you know, and I love that too. I mean, you should, or myself, I mean, put a project together as an exercise to have a team building event, but nobody can talk and
Yeah.
and watch that unfold. That's powerful stuff, man.
Yeah. I've actually got a training coming up next month about ableism. And I learned this in another training where we actually give activities, and it's all activities about how people process communication, and to watch people try and communicate when they can't hear the words that you say is really, really interesting because it forces you to get really, really present if you want to be good at it. And if it actually matters to you, it forces you to get present. It forces you to pay attention. And it gives a little bit of empathy because there's so many people that have these things going on that they never talk about it for any amount of reasons. I think that a lot of time it comes from this internalized guilt and externalized shame that they think that they're broken because this thing doesn't work exactly the way that whoever's in their life, how it works for them. And so we've been taught that we're broken, and nobody in the world, I don't care what you've done. I don't care if you're addicted to drugs, addicted to anything. I don't care if you have a disability. Nobody is broken. Nobody is broken. You are whole and complete regardless of what's happening. Now, do you have circumstances in which you want to change? Okay, but that doesn't make you broken. And anybody who is pushing that narrative, don't get don't come near me because I don't want to talk about that because that's just creating a whole lot of problems that don't need to exist in the world.
I love that, man. I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Nathan.
Yeah.
Um, how do people, if people want to find Nathan Todd, where do we find you at?
Yeah, so right now I'm pushing two places. Number one, Instagram. You'll find me over there all the time, posting all the time. And that's at the real Nathan Todd. And then also started a new Facebook community called Connected AF, and I try and create really meaningful posts over there. It's interesting with where we are in social media because I'm like, okay, what do I post here, and how do I make it this unique to everything else, and not just repost everything everywhere. But over there, you can find Connected AF, and you just have to answer a few couple questions about connection, and you're good to go. And then I also started, and you can only find this through being a part of my community, but connect conversations with the loneliness coach. So they're either conversations like this one that I would have with other people, or just thoughts that I've been thinking where I'm having a conversation from my perspective, And so it's like a private conversation. You can't find it on uh, like Apple or Spotify or anything like that. So those are places where you can find me at this moment.
It's awesome. So one last question, Nathan. What does it mean to you, the phrase own your space?
Oh man, yeah, I love that title. So owning my space, in this moment, I'm going to go with what's on my shirt here. And so for those of you who are only hearing this, my shirt, it looks like you have your alerts set up on your phone, and I've got 2 words switched on and 1 word switched off. And so what it says is patient, diligent, and quit. So patient and diligent are turned on, and quit is turned off. And so to own my space, I must be patient. I must be patient with the process of what it is I think that I'm here to create, what I must do to create it. I must be diligent with the process, so I must show it care. Um, and for me, a lot of times the process is people. So I got to show the people who have chosen to invest in me that I'm invested back into them and never quit. And so, a lot of times people get that misconstrued, that you just never quit on anything. I don't actually think that that's the case. But for me, when when you're owning your space, it means that you don't quit on that thing that you feel like you've been called to do. Because the moment that I think like I have this theory that the moment you die is the moment that you've completed what you were here on this earth to do, regardless of what it is, regardless if you figure it out. Um, I think for me, that's what I choose to believe in. Like that's when we leave this place is because we finished what we were supposed to do. Um, and the other thing, man, and owning my space looks like something. When I think of the goals that I have, I've got this idea that people say dream big. I don't actually subscribe to that anymore. Do I have big dreams? Yes. Do I think that that's the way to go? No. So what I tell you is dream small. Dream small, because as Jason said in that poem, the present is all that we got. All that we got right now is us having this conversation. And I think that too many people that aren't owning their space are caught up in thinking that I have this big thing that I want to do. I have this, like, it's so big. I've been taught to dream so big, to shoot for the moon, land in the stars type stuff. And what does that do? That paralyzes you from doing anything. And so I want you to imagine that. What if I told you tomorrow you were going to die? Like, what would become important then?
Yeah.
Because the 24/10 principle, focus on your 24 hours, forget about your 10 years. Because the 24 hours is all that you have. So build on that, have conversations around that, and So when you have this daily dream, play that daily dream out to 100%. Play it big. Play it as big as possible. And then you repeat that process over and over. Because nobody said you couldn't create something big by stitching all those daily dreams together and creating an amazing picture.
That's awesome. I'd love to, on your shirt there, how you've got patient and diligent enabled and quit disabled. I'd love to add be present enabled. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was deciding, man. I'm a guy that I love to wear shirts that start conversations, and I've got another one that talks about risk, be courageous, risk rejection, create connection, and expect nothing. And expectations is turned off. And I think that also is a part of owning your space. The more you're able to turn off the expectations, then there's a lot of freedom in that. And I actually think that Nike does a disservice in just doing it. And the most free times that I think exist are when we're given permission by ourselves to try things and see what happens, instead of saying I'm just going to do it. Like, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And trying is a form of doing, but it opens you up to possibilities you may not have even considered. If somebody's like, you're going to do it and you're going to like it. And so
I love that, man. I'm so glad that we are having this conversation, that you and I are communicating, we're connecting right now. And I want to thank you for your time, Nathan, and we'll stay connected. I think there's definitely more to come. I appreciate you, brother.
I appreciate you as well.
All right, man. You have a good day.
All right. You too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.